You really think you can just walk around here like you own the place?" The words cut through the air, each one dripping with condescension. Officer David Marshall, a tall and burly figure with years of power backing him, spoke with a sneer as he towered over Marcus Williams. His eyes narrowed, and there was a mocking grin tugging at the corner of his lips. Marcus stood his ground, his posture calm and unwavering, though his heart was racing. He'd seen this before. The look, the tone, the way people like Marshall believed they were above the law simply because of their badge and the color of their skin. Today he was just another boy in their eyes. But Marcus knew that things were about to change. The crowd gathered around them on the street corner watched, some whispering, others recording the moment on their phones, but no one dared to step forward. Everyone knew better than to cross a cop like Marshall, especially when he had a reason to show power. Marcus could feel the heat of their gaze, the weight of their silence pressing in on him. But he didn't flinch. He wouldn't. It wasn't just about him. He wasn't some innocent bystander waiting for a moment to speak. He wasn't a man who would let this pass without a plan. Officer Marshall had made a mistake, and Marcus had known that the moment he'd been called boy, the wheels were already in motion. Marcus wasn't just anyone. He wasn't the guy you could push around. But Marshall didn't know that yet. Marcus was no stranger to battles. He'd fought in wars, served in the military, and faced far worse threats than the mockery of a single officer. He'd seen the ugly side of the world, the deep-seated hate that didn't just affect him, but his community. And that's why he stood there, not speaking, not reacting to the insults. His silence was calculated, and the tension in the air built with each passing second. Then, the words that no one expected to hear came next. Marshall turned to the officer next to him, a low laugh escaping his lips. These people always think they can get away with whatever they want. The crowd tensed, the whispers growing louder, but still, Marcus said nothing. His calm demeanor only made Marshall angrier. "I'm not letting you go until I've figured this out," Marshall snapped, as he reached for his handcuffs. Marcus didn't move. He didn't even blink. The world around him seemed to slow, the background noise of the crowd fading into the distance. "This is a mistake," Marcus said, his voice steady and calm. "You have no idea who I am." Marshall paused for a second, then continued his approach, undeterred. But Marcus' words weren't a challenge. They were a warning. Marshall hadn't noticed the subtle shifts in Marcus' demeanor, the slight tilt of his head, the slight narrowing of his eyes. Marcus wasn't afraid. And just when Marshall thought he'd won, just when he was ready to take Marcus in, the truth came crashing down. Just as he clicked the handcuffs around Marcus' wrists, the air shifted. The crowd seemed to part, and footsteps echoed from the far end of the street. A black SUV pulled up, and before Marshall could react, the door swung open. 2 FBI agents stepped out, their presence commanding attention. The tension broke, and the crowd gasped. Marshall froze, his heart pounding as he turned to face them. One of the agents stepped forward, flipping open his badge. "You're under investigation for corruption, Marshall. This ends now." Marshall's face drained of color. The smug confidence that had been there moments ago evaporated as he stood frozen in place. Marcus was no longer just a man being harassed on the street. He was an agent, part of something far bigger, and the moment Marshall had humiliated him was the moment the entire precinct's empire started to crumble. The agents moved quickly, their actions precise, and within minutes, the precinct was being raided, all because of a single moment where Marshall had thought he could break Marcus. But it wasn't Marcus who was about to be broken. It was Marshall. And as the truth came to light, everyone realized the only thing worse than racism was the karma that was about to come for Marshall. Marcus stood in the center of the commotion, his arms crossed, watching as the FBI agents moved swiftly, taking control of the situation. The police precinct, once filled with the harsh sounds of authority, was now drowning in a sea of confusion and panic. Officers, once confident in their power, now looked like deer caught in headlights. Marshall, the man who had called him boy just moments before, was now standing frozen, his face pale. The room was thick with disbelief, the kind of disbelief that comes when a powerful empire begins to crumble, piece by piece. Marcus didn't feel triumph, though. There was no satisfaction in seeing a man like Marshall get what was coming to him. Not for him, anyway. His job had never been about revenge. It was about righting wrongs. And right now, this was just one step in a much larger game. The agents were calm, collected, their presence a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding. They moved with precision, their eyes scanning the room, locking onto every officer, every corner of the building. As they worked, Marcus thought about the larger mission. His involvement with the FBI wasn't just because of Marshall. It was because of the systemic corruption that ran deep within the precinct, within law enforcement as a whole. This was bigger than one officer's abuse of power. This was about dismantling an entire network that had protected itself for far too long. Marcus could feel the weight of that responsibility on his shoulders. But it wasn't a burden. It was his purpose. As the agents continued to search through files, pull evidence from drawers, and arrest key individuals involved in the operation, Marcus couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had led him here. From the early days of his military career to his transition into security and finally into the quiet, unseen role he now played in exposing corruption, every step had prepared him for this moment. The sound of footsteps drew his attention. He turned, and there, standing in the doorway, was a familiar face. It was his contact, the senior FBI agent who had been working alongside him on this case. "We've got everything we need," the agent said, his voice low but filled with authority. Marcus nodded, a silent acknowledgement of the work done. But there was still more to do. "And Marshall?" Marcus asked. The agent gave a tight smile. "He's not going anywhere. But this isn't just about him. It's about taking down everyone involved. We're not stopping with one officer." Marcus's eyes narrowed as he took in the gravity of the statement. This was the kind of operation that required careful strategy and patience. It wasn't just about making a statement. It was about making sure that the message was loud and clear, that the system of abuse and injustice wouldn't survive. As the hours passed, the FBI continued their work, but Marcus could feel a shift in the energy of the precinct. Where once there had been arrogance, there was now fear. The agents worked quickly, collecting data, preparing to shut down the entire network that had allowed men like Marshall to thrive. And Marcus stood there, knowing that this was just the beginning. This wasn't about individual victories. It was about the long game. And the long game was just starting to unfold. The room was filled with the hum of activity, the agents pulling files, making calls, preparing for the next phase of their operation. Marcus felt the weight of his next steps. But for now, he was content. Today, they had made a significant dent in the corruption that had run unchecked for too long. And as he watched Marshall being escorted out in cuffs, Marcus couldn't help but think of the many others who would soon follow. The dominoes were already falling. The sound of the FBI agents' footsteps echoed through the hall as they continued to raid the precinct. But Marcus stood still, his mind a whirl of thoughts. He wasn't celebrating. He wasn't satisfied. There was still so much left to do, so many more layers of this corrupt system to peel back. He had been trained for this, not just in combat, but in patience, in strategy, and in the quiet art of watching, waiting for the right moment. And this moment, this very one, was about more than just a few bad apples. This was about sending a message. The precinct was under siege, but the job wasn't finished yet. Marcus turned and walked through the maze of desks, past officers who were still in shock, their eyes wide as they watched the FBI agents work. It was the kind of tension that didn't dissipate quickly. It lingered in the air, thick, like smoke. Everyone knew the truth now. They knew what had been happening in this building for years, and they knew it wasn't just one bad officer. It was a system, a network, a culture. As Marcus passed a small office, he noticed one of the lower-ranking officers, a young man, standing at the door, watching with a mix of confusion and fear. Marcus paused, looking at him for a moment before he spoke. "You don't have to be part of this," Marcus said quietly. The officer didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked down at the floor, as if ashamed. "I'm just trying to keep my job," he muttered finally. Marcus shook his head, a small sigh escaping him. "There's always a choice," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. "You can choose to walk away, or you can choose to stay and be part of something that's going to fall apart. But know this, what happens next is bigger than you. It's bigger than any of us." The young officer looked up, eyes meeting Marcus for the first time. There was something there, a flicker of realization, something that hadn't been there before. But the moment passed quickly, and the officer nodded, stepping back from the door. Marcus didn't know if he would take the chance. He didn't know if anyone would. But the seed had been planted. Walking away, Marcus returned to the center of the operation, where the FBI agents were now assembling files, sorting through evidence, and making phone calls. His contact from earlier walked up to him, a stack of papers in his hands. "We've got everything we need from this place," the agent said. "The investigation's going to move fast now. Marshall's just the beginning." Marcus nodded, but his thoughts were already elsewhere. He couldn't afford to stop. Not yet. "What happens to the rest of the officers?" Marcus asked, his voice steady but with a quiet intensity. "We'll deal with them," the agent replied. "But we need to make sure this network is taken down. We've got more work to do." Marcus' eyes hardened as he took a deep breath. "Then let's make sure it's done right," he said. The agents worked into the night, and Marcus stayed with them, the weight of the task before him heavy on his shoulders. This wasn't just about cleaning up a single precinct. This was about cleaning up an entire system. And Marcus knew the road ahead would be long and difficult. But he was ready. He had always been ready. As the final moments of the operation unfolded, with the last of the evidence gathered and the corrupt officers in custody, Marcus stood alone in the empty precinct. The silence was deafening. For a moment, he allowed himself to take it in. The calm, the stillness, the weight of what had just happened. But there was no time for relief. Not yet. There was still more to do, more to uncover. The job was never really finished. And Marcus was already thinking ahead, planning his next move. As the sun set over the city, casting long shadows over the now empty precinct, Marcus stood by the window, looking out over the streets below. The agents had done their part, the arrests were made, and the corrupt officers were taken into custody. But still, the weight of it all lingered. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning, that there were more layers to uncover, more powerful figures to expose. The precinct that had once seemed like a fortress was now crumbling, its walls filled with secrets that no longer had a place to hide. Marcus had seen this kind of destruction before. He'd watched systems fall, watched power structures crumble under the weight of their own corruption. But this felt different. It wasn't just about the officers who had abused their power. It was about the larger system that had allowed them to thrive. It was about the people who had turned a blind eye, who had looked the other way while others suffered. And it was about ensuring that the damage done was never repeated. Marcus' phone buzzed in his pocket, pulling him from his thoughts. He pulled it out, seeing a message from his FBI contact. "We've got intel. Need to meet." Marcus didn't hesitate. He knew this was far from over. He grabbed his jacket, left the precinct, and headed to the meet-up spot. As he entered the small, dimly lit cafe, he spotted the agent sitting at a corner table. The agent didn't wait for him to sit down. He spoke as soon as Marcus approached. "We've got a bigger problem than we thought," the agent said, his voice low. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "Marshall wasn't the only one," the agent continued. "We've traced the corruption to higher levels. There's a network, and it goes all the way to the top." Marcus' mind raced. "Top of the department?" "Higher," the agent replied. "We're talking about people with political power. People who have been pulling strings for years." Marcus leaned forward, his instincts kicking in. "How high are we talking?" The agent hesitated for a moment before replying. "We think it's connected to the mayor's office." Marcus didn't flinch, but the news hit him hard. The mayor's office. That was bigger than anything he'd imagined. He knew the risks were higher now. They were no longer just going after bad cops. They were going after the very people who had the power to make or break careers, who could influence the course of entire investigations. Marcus didn't say anything at first. He just took a deep breath, absorbing the gravity of the situation. It was dangerous, but it was also an opportunity. The people at the top thought they were untouchable, that their power shielded them from consequences. But Marcus had spent his entire life dismantling those kinds of structures. "What's the next step?" Marcus asked. The agent slid a file across the table. "We need to gather more evidence. We're not ready to make a move yet, but we're close. We need you to infiltrate some of the circles around the mayor's office. We need to find out who's really in control." Marcus nodded. "I'm in." As he left the cafe, the weight of the task ahead settled on his shoulders. He knew what this meant. It meant stepping into dangerous territory, navigating a world of deceit and manipulation. But it was what he was born to do. The pieces were starting to fall into place. The mission had evolved. It wasn't just about taking down a corrupt precinct anymore. It was about exposing a much larger conspiracy, one that reached far beyond what anyone had imagined. Marcus felt a surge of determination. This wasn't the end. This was just the next chapter in a fight that had been brewing for far too long. The next few days were a blur for Marcus. Every moment was spent preparing, gathering intel, and positioning himself to infiltrate the circles around the mayor's office. He knew that this was the dangerous part of the mission, the part where the stakes were higher than ever. The higher-ups thought they were untouchable, but Marcus had spent his life proving people wrong, exposing the cracks in systems that seemed impenetrable. He wasn't afraid. He was focused. His contact in the FBI had provided him with a list of people who were connected to the mayor's office, individuals who had ties to the corrupt officers Marcus had helped take down. Some of them were low-level, others were much more powerful. His job was to get close to them, to learn what they knew and, more importantly, what they were hiding. Marcus knew this wasn't going to be easy. He had to be careful. One wrong move, and he could expose himself. But he had trained for moments like this. His experience in military intelligence, combined with his understanding of human nature, gave him an edge. He could blend in when he needed to, slip through cracks when the walls around him seemed to close in. The first step was gaining the trust of one of the mayor's top aides, a man named Richard Cole. Cole was well-connected, influential, and above all, he had the ear of the mayor. Marcus knew that if he could get close to Cole, he could get closer to the heart of the corruption. The opportunity came when Marcus attended a fundraiser for a local charity, an event that Cole was known to frequent. Marcus wasn't there to make a scene. He was there to observe, to listen, to learn. He blended in with the crowd, his attire fitting in perfectly with the wealthy donors and local politicians that surrounded him. Cole arrived a little later, surrounded by a small group of associates. Marcus watched from across the room, studying the man's every move. He was charismatic, speaking with ease to anyone who approached him, but Marcus could see the subtle hints of arrogance in the way he held himself. Cole thought he was untouchable, but Marcus could see the cracks. After a few hours of watching, Marcus made his move. He approached Cole, casually, offering a handshake and introducing himself as someone with ties to a few local businesses. Cole took the bait, shaking his hand with a warm smile. "It's always good to meet people who support the community," Cole said smoothly, his eyes scanning the room as if looking for the next person to speak to. "What brings you to tonight's event?" Marcus kept it light, speaking about his involvement in local businesses and charity work. He didn't push too hard, didn't ask too many questions, but he was careful to make himself appear like someone who could be useful to Cole. It wasn't long before Cole began to warm up to him, inviting him to join a smaller group of donors for drinks. The conversation was casual at first, but Marcus knew this was the opening he needed. He asked about the mayor's office, subtly probing for information about the connections between the mayor and the police department. Cole didn't give much away, but Marcus could tell he was carefully weighing his words. "Politics, you know," Cole said with a chuckle. "It's all about who you know and what you can do for them." Marcus nodded, sensing that Cole was testing him, trying to figure out if he was trustworthy. He smiled and agreed, but his mind was racing. This was the beginning. He had to get deeper into this world, had to earn Cole's trust until he could learn more. The rest of the evening passed without incident, but Marcus left the fundraiser with a sense of accomplishment. He had made his first connection, had planted the seed of trust with Cole. It was a small victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. The next steps would be harder. He would have to be patient, careful, and relentless. But he was ready. The wheels were already in motion, and Marcus knew it was only a matter of time before he could expose the full extent of the corruption that ran through the mayor's office. He had come too far to stop now. The days following Marcus' first encounter with Richard Cole passed in a blur of preparation and subtle moves. He continued to attend events, slowly integrating himself into the circles surrounding the mayor's office, while carefully building his rapport with Cole. Each interaction felt calculated, a delicate dance of charm and patience. Marcus knew that it wasn't about rushing in. It was about earning trust, creating connections, and gathering the pieces of a puzzle that no one wanted to be solved. One evening, after a week of meetings, Marcus received a message from Cole, asking him to meet. His heart raced as he read the brief text. This could be the break he was waiting for. He immediately arranged to meet Cole at a discreet restaurant on the outskirts of town, a place where conversations could be had without prying ears. When Marcus arrived, Cole was already seated at a corner booth, nursing a glass of whiskey. The air between them felt different now, The familiarity of their earlier meetings replaced by something more intimate, something that hinted at deeper conversations. "Good to see you again," Cole said, his voice warm but guarded. He gestured for Marcus to sit down. "I hope you're finding everything to your liking." "I'm getting to know the right people," Marcus replied smoothly, sliding into the seat opposite him. He could sense that Cole was testing him, measuring whether he was genuinely interested in the people around him or just another opportunist. "You know how it is in this city," Marcus continued, leaning in slightly. "It's all about making the right connections." Cole's eyes narrowed, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then he leaned back, swirling his drink in his glass. "That's true," he said slowly. "And sometimes those connections can lead to unexpected opportunities." Marcus kept his gaze steady, not revealing the flicker of interest he felt. He knew this was the moment to push, but carefully. "What do you mean by unexpected opportunities?" he asked, his tone casual, but with an underlying curiosity. Cole smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was the kind of smile that hinted at secrets, at things that weren't being said outright. "Let's just say that in this city, we all have our roles to play," he replied cryptically. "The mayor's office isn't the only place where deals are made." Marcus felt the weight of the statement. It wasn't a direct admission, but it was a step closer. Cole was offering him a glimpse into a world that he hadn't yet fully entered, a world of influence and power that extended far beyond the mayor's office. Marcus could feel the pieces of the puzzle shifting, falling into place. But he knew he had to be patient. One wrong move, one wrong question, and Cole could shut him down completely. "I'm sure there's a lot of moving parts behind the scenes," Marcus said smoothly, playing his part. "But I'm more than willing to help, in any way I can." Cole studied him for a moment, his eyes flicking over Marcus' face as if searching for signs of deception. Then, with a slow nod, he set his glass down. "You know," he said, leaning forward slightly, "there's one thing you should understand about this city. People like us, we don't get involved in anything without knowing the risks." Marcus kept his face neutral, but inside, his mind was racing. This was the opening he needed. Cole was acknowledging the stakes, the game they were playing. He was willing to bring Marcus in, at least to some extent. "I understand," Marcus replied, his voice steady. "And I'm not afraid to take risks." The conversation shifted then, with Cole telling Marcus about some of the more influential people in the mayor's circle, dropping names of individuals who were involved in shady dealings, people who held power over the city's future. Each name was a potential lead, each detail another piece of the puzzle. As the night wore on, Marcus continued to listen, absorbing every word, every subtle hint. He knew he couldn't act too quickly. He had to wait, to let the information come to him. But the more he learned, the closer he got to the truth. As Marcus left the restaurant that night, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was getting closer to the core of the corruption. The pieces were falling into place. All he needed now was to stay patient, to wait for the right moment to make his move. The days following Marcus' meeting with Cole felt like a slow burn. He had his foot in the door now, but he wasn't going to rush things. With each new conversation, he felt the threads of the web he was tangled in growing tighter, more intricate. His relationship with Cole had reached a new level of familiarity, and Marcus could sense that the man was beginning to trust him, little by little. But trust was a fragile thing. One misstep, one wrong move, and it could all unravel. He continued to attend events, meet people, and listen closely, absorbing information like a sponge. Each name, each detail, was another piece of the puzzle. And while Marcus was focused on his mission, there was a growing sense of unease in the back of his mind. The deeper he got, the more he realized just how big this corruption ran. It wasn't just the mayor's office anymore. It was the whole system, law enforcement, politics, the people who were supposed to protect and serve, the very ones who were now orchestrating a web of deceit. One night, as Marcus was reviewing the notes from his latest conversations, he received an unexpected call. The voice on the other end was familiar, but laced with urgency. "Marcus, we need to talk." "It's urgent." The line went dead before he could respond. Without hesitation, Marcus grabbed his jacket and headed out the door. He met the agent at a discreet location, a quiet alley tucked behind an unassuming cafe. The agent was waiting, pacing nervously. "What's going on?" Marcus asked, his eyes scanning the street for any sign of trouble. "We've got a leak," the agent said, his voice tense. Someone tipped off Cole about our investigation. He knows we're closing in. Marcus' stomach tightened. What does he know? The agent hesitated. Not everything, but enough to be dangerous. He's starting to make moves, pulling strings behind the scenes to cover his tracks. We need to move fast. Marcus clenched his fists. This was it. The moment he had been waiting for. The moment that could change everything. He had to stay ahead, stay one step ahead of the people who thought they could bury the truth. What's the plan? Marcus asked. The agent pulled out a file, handing it over to him. We have a list of people who might be involved, people close to Cole. We need to take them down before they have a chance to cover their tracks. But we need to be careful. Cole's not a fool. He's going to fight back. Marcus studied the file, his mind working. Quickly, we need to cut him off at the source. If we can't take down the network from the outside, we need to infiltrate from the inside. I'll keep working, Cole. Get closer to the core. The agent nodded, understanding the gravity of the plan. Be careful. This isn't just about corruption anymore. It's about keeping the truth from getting out. Marcus didn't say anything, but his resolve hardened. This was bigger than anything he had faced before. He had no intention of backing down. He was already too deep, and the stakes were too high. He would finish this. He would expose the people who thought they could control everything, the ones who had taken so much for granted. As he walked away from the meeting, the weight of the task before him pressed down on him. But there was no turning back now. The final act was about to begin, and Marcus was ready to bring the truth to light, no matter the cost. Marcus had never felt the weight of the city's corruption as heavily as he did now. Every conversation, every step, felt like he was treading deeper into a shadow that threatened to swallow him whole. His alliance with Cole had opened doors, but it had also brought him closer to a web of deceit that was far more dangerous than he had anticipated. The tension was palpable, and with every move he made, the stakes grew higher. He couldn't afford to falter. Not now. The information from the agent's file weighed on his mind as he continued to move through the tight, oppressive circles around Cole. He had to maintain his position, build the trust he needed to gather the final pieces of the puzzle. But every conversation felt like walking on a tightrope. He had to be careful not to reveal too much, not to push too hard, not to give away his hand. Time was running out. Marcus met with Cole more frequently now, each time making small talk, listening carefully, observing every move. Cole had started to drop hints, indirect comments about certain people in power, names Marcus had seen in the file. The deeper Marcus got, the more he realized just how far-reaching this corruption was. It wasn't just a matter of bad cops or dirty politicians. It was a system, a network that had infiltrated every level of government and law enforcement. As Marcus spent more time with Cole, he began to see the cracks in the man's confidence. He wasn't as untouchable as he thought. Cole had been using his influence to protect a hidden agenda, but Marcus had learned enough to see through the facade. One evening, after a particularly intense meeting, Marcus felt a shift in the air. There was something different about the way Cole looked at him. It was subtle, but it was there, a flicker of suspicion, a shift in tone that made Marcus' heart race. Marcus kept his composure, but he knew that the walls were closing in. He had pushed Cole to the edge, and now the real challenge began. The agent's warning echoed in his mind. Cole's not a fool. Marcus had to stay one step ahead. That night, he left the meeting with a new sense of urgency. He couldn't afford to let Cole catch on. The next few days were a blur of quiet surveillance and discreet conversations. Marcus had started to gather evidence, pieces of a larger puzzle that pointed to a network of corruption reaching farther than he could have imagined. He knew that he couldn't do this alone. He needed the FBI's full support, but they had to move carefully. One mistake, one slip-up, and the entire investigation could collapse. The pressure was mounting, but Marcus was determined to see this through. He had come too far to back down now. He reached out to his contact within the FBI, requesting a meeting. The agent arrived at a safe house a few hours later, his face grim. "We've got to move fast," the agent said, handing over a new set of files. "Cole's on the move. He's getting more paranoid, and he knows we're closing in." Marcus scanned the files, his eyes narrowing as he processed the new information. "What's our next step?" he asked, his voice steady. The agent leaned in closer. "We've identified some key players in Cole's network. We need to get to them before he has a chance to cover his tracks. It's time to make our move." Marcus felt the weight of those words. This was it. The final push. The pieces were all in place. He had the information, the connections, and the resolve to take down the system that had been built on lies and manipulation. It was time to expose the truth, no matter the cost. But as he prepared to make his next move, a thought lingered in his mind. The truth wasn't always enough. The fight for justice was a long one, and Marcus knew that even if they brought down Cole, there would always be others waiting in the shadows. He was ready for the fight. He had to be. The operation was set in motion, and Marcus knew there was no turning back. The FBI had already identified the key players, and every moment felt critical. They were getting closer to the truth, but as the pieces came together, the pressure mounted. Cole was becoming more cautious, more erratic. It was only a matter of time before he realized that the walls were closing in. Marcus stayed in constant contact with his FBI contact, who updated him on every development. It wasn't just about Cole anymore. The investigation had expanded, and the deeper they dug, the more corruption they uncovered. Every new discovery revealed a greater network, one that spanned more than just law enforcement and politics. It was a system, a shadowy infrastructure that supported itself by keeping others in the dark. As Marcus prepared for the next phase of the plan, he felt a sharp sense of urgency. They couldn't waste any more time. He was in too deep now. The information he had gathered was enough to bring down some of the most powerful figures in the city, but it wouldn't be enough if Cole managed to get away. The network would rebuild, and they would lose their chance. Marcus met with the agent once more, this time at a remote location to discuss the final steps. "We're ready," the agent said, his voice low. "We have everything we need. We go in tomorrow." Marcus nodded, feeling the weight of the moment settle over him. It wasn't just about exposing the corruption. It was about changing the system, ensuring that the people who had been oppressed for so long would finally get justice. "I'll make sure Cole doesn't slip away," Marcus said, his voice steady, though the tension in his chest told a different story. "We're all in this together," the agent replied. "Let's bring this to an end." The next day, Marcus went to the mayor's office, under the guise of attending a meeting with Cole. The tension was palpable. Cole was now on edge, his every move calculated. He knew that the investigation was closing in, but he didn't know how close Marcus had actually gotten. As the meeting went on, Marcus carefully watched Cole, listening to his words, watching his every expression. He could see the cracks, Cole's attempts to control the situation, his desperate attempts to hide the truth. But Marcus had already seen enough. The time had come. He made the call. Within minutes, the FBI raided the mayor's office, taking Cole into custody, along with several other key figures from his network. The shock was immediate. No one saw it coming. As Marcus stood there, watching the agents work, he felt a strange sense of relief wash over him. It was over. For now, at least. But the victory wasn't without its costs. Marcus knew that this was just one battle in a much larger war. The system wouldn't change overnight. But today, they had won. The truth had come out, and the people who had used their power to oppress others were finally being held accountable. As Marcus walked away from the scene, he felt the weight of the day on his shoulders, but there was also a sense of hope. It was a small victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like he had made a difference.